All right, hi. So I'm Jasmine Begeske. I'm from Purdue University. The title of this presentation is Teaching Art to Diverse Students with Disabilities. There are a few studies that concentrate on making visual arts instruction more meaningful and accessible for diverse students with disabilities. So the focus of this review of the literature is an attempt to find those studies. The goals of this presentation are that first I will describe the search for literature, and then I will discuss the gap in the literature. In this presentation, I'll make reference to CLD, or culturally and linguistically diverse students. I will also refer to culture broadly and inclusive of historically marginalized racial, ethnic, linguistic, sexual, and gender minority students, as well as those with disabilities. 94.9% of students served under IDEA were educated in general education for at least some portion of the school day. For many students with disabilities, that some portion of the school day where they were included with their peers was the arts. After the passage of Public Law 94-142 in 1975, guaranteeing students with disabilities a free and appropriate education, arts educators were among the first to include students with disabilities and have been referred to as inclusion pioneers. Access to arts education has decreased disproportionately for CLD students. There is an increasing divide in access between Black, Latinx students and their white peers. This table illustrates that decrease in access to arts education. Diversity among students with disabilities has increased. Overrepresentation of CLD students in special education has been a persistent issue. 14.2% of the total English language learner ELL population receives special education. The highest percentage of students served under IDEA by race ethnicity was American Indian, Alaska Native, followed by Black students, white students, and students of two or more races, then Latinx students, Pacific Islander students, and then finally Asian students. The ELL student population has grown. 14.2% of the total ELL population also receives special education. LGBT identification is on the rise, but it is an under-researched group within special education. LGBT students with disabilities are virtually ignored in the literature, even though LGBT students are more likely than the general population to have a disability, according to the MAP, or Movement Advancement Project, or MAP. A significant number of students' identities intersect at the cultural crossroads of disability, race, ethnicity, and/or language, and an unknown number of LGBT identities. The purpose of this study was to review the literature and identify existing practices in K-12 visual arts education that addresses the growing need for attention to intersecting cultural and disability identity. Additionally, I looked for cultural representation and recognition within the practices and materials that reflected and affirmed student identity. I also looked for articles that included the voice and visibility of artists with disabilities or disability artists. Now I'll describe my search procedures. Articles were identified through a comprehensive search of the literature using the electronic databases Artful Text, Education Full Text, ERIC, PsycInfo, and Google Scholar. Studies were limited to peer-reviewed articles in English, with a publication year between 2009 and 2019 to reflect the most current research. Boolean searches for key populations of students' culture were combined with phrases for specific context for visual arts and for teaching practices such as culturally responsive teaching or culturally responsive pedagogy, inclusion, or inclusive education. The largest and oldest art education and special education professional organization publications were specifically searched, including Exceptional Children, Teaching Exceptional Children, Studies in Art Education, and Art Education, as well as the International Journal of Art and Design Education and the Journal of the Arts and Special Education. VSA at the Kennedy Center is the international organization leading efforts around the intersection of the arts and special education. Their 4 volumes of professional papers were searched, as well as a published annotated bibliography of journal articles and books. I also searched Arts Ed Search, an online clearinghouse of research focused on the outcomes of art education. So basically, I looked everywhere I could think of. Arts education, as you know, is an umbrella term, which includes various individual art disciplines: music, visual arts, dance, theater. The focus of this review of the literature was on inclusion in visual arts. Terms like teaching through the arts, embedded arts education, and arts integration all refer to using the arts to enhance instruction in another content area. These articles were omitted, as well as articles related to art therapy. Keywords identified many off-topic abstracts: language arts, state of the arts, art activities, attending art class, art of, clip art, lost art of. So there was a lot that needed to be eliminated. There were 2 criteria for inclusion. First, articles had to include a K-12 visual arts education instructional strategy for students with disabilities in the United States. Second, the article had to include reference to a second dimension of culture defined as race, ethnicity, language, gender identity, sexual identity, or intersecting identities. The extensive search unfortunately produced no peer-reviewed articles. 8 peer-reviewed, practitioner-focused articles were located that addressed the instructional needs of diverse students or students with disabilities. You can see those articles displayed here in the table, which describes their design, participants, descriptions of students from the articles, and the cultural dimension addressed. Three of those articles circled here in the table in red include instructional strategies, materials, or activities that were responsive to the race or ethnicity of students, including the Eldridge 2013 article, Lopez 2009, and Martinez 2012 articles. These were all case studies in secondary classrooms. The other 5 articles, now circled in red, addressed instructional strategies, materials, or activities responsive to disability. 4 were general reviews about classroom supports for students with disabilities. Those were the Alter-Murray 2017 article, Burdick et al. 2012, Coleman et al. 2015, and Wexler et al. 2015 articles. The Seidler 2011 article was a project-based case study about confronting disability stereotypes. The first theme identified was the type of evidence available. The intersection of art and disability is still an emerging field of research. All of these articles are practice-based evidence. Strategies to include students with disabilities in visual arts instruction are included in textbooks for pre-service teachers, 2 of which are pictured here, practitioner journals, and art education magazines. This large base of practitioner-driven evidence has historically been recognized as a valid means of understanding and disseminating approaches to teaching diverse learners. But a need for evidence-based practice for the intersection of art education and special education has emerged in conjunction with the rise of inclusion. The second theme included responding to diversity. Lopez interviewed and analyzed the artwork of 3 6th grade female students who identified as dual cultural, but not as students with disabilities. The purpose of the project was to better understand how they spoke about identity and culture. Martinez described a culturally responsive teaching approach called culture jamming. 8 students were given blurry pictures of faces from 3 ethnic groups and given 3 names. They were asked which name best fit the person. The activity was followed up with questions about perception. The author found that the activity elicited connections to stereotypes, racial profiling, biracial identity, and perceptions about ethnicity. Eldridge 2013 described including a graffiti artist from the community in a 7th and 8th grade visual arts classroom in a predominantly low-income Latinx school. This was the only article that included artwork by a CLD artist. Here in the picture on the slide, you see artwork included in the Eldridge article that was in response to learning about graffiti art. These 3 case studies described approaches to responding to culture within visual arts instruction, examining self and others. The 3rd theme was responding to disability. Fighting Disability Stereotypes with Comics is the title of the article by Sedler. And it included students with and without disabilities, where they examined comics made by disability artists John and Claire Lytle. Similar in purpose to the Martinez article, this article also examined student perceptions. 2 of the studies address the needs of students with autism spectrum disorder, ASD. Wexler et al. Included narratives by people with autism and discussed ways to make the environment and equipment in the art room accessible, whereas Alter Muri described visual arts instructional strategies and UDL. The Coleman et al. And Burdick et al. Articles describe supports for students with more intense needs. While examples were limited, visual arts teachers are adapting tools, using AT, arranging their classroom for access, and using inclusive practices to address the needs of students with disabilities. Efforts in making art instruction more accessible are evidenced in the literature, but few studies concentrate on making instruction more meaningful through representation. Only the Wexler et al. Article included the voice of student artists with disabilities, and the Sedler article was the only one to include the artwork of disability artists. You can see 2 disabled comics used in the Sedler article now on the slide. In the first comic, someone with a microphone is asking a man in a wheelchair, "Tell me, is your wheelchair comfortable? Do you like the way you look in it? What would you change?" And the man responds the question. The second comic shows 2 men standing at the top of a staircase. One man is using a wheelchair. The man not using a wheelchair says, "Those stairs are steep. Do you need some help?" To which the other man responds, "Sure, man, write the city council for me." Sedler used these comics to prompt students to respond to depictions of barriers and disability. By using disability artists in the curriculum, she helps to normalize disability for students. Teaching practices that are responsive to learner identity incorporate aspects of students' culture into the curriculum. Students need a curriculum that reflects their identity to affirm their importance in the classroom and in the world. A curriculum and teacher that acknowledge cultural experience within a community can shift perceptions about who belongs and who can succeed. Equity efforts in STEM education may offer a model for practices that can be applied to accessing arts curricula, such as incorporating meaningful representation of the contributions of people from various cultural backgrounds. When the teaching force is primarily made up of white women, it is especially important to contextualize the experiences of CLD students in the classroom. Art educators can reflect student identities in creating and responding to artwork. 2 of the articles reviewed included artwork of diverse or disability artists in the curriculum. More of this work is needed. An important finding from this review is the absence of studies addressing intersecting cultural identities in visual arts education practice. Published articles did not address the needs of children with mild disabilities, children at the elementary level, ELL students with disabilities, intersections of gender, sexual identity, and disability or any other intersecting learner identity. So we have much work to do. This confirms the need and urgency for more research on the instructional strategies and curricular approaches specific to the arts and outcomes for diverse students with disabilities, as highlighted in Priority Area 2 of the Arts and Special Education, a map for research published by the VSA in 2017. Finally, my suggestions for further research include gaining a greater understanding of the needs of those teaching art to diverse students with disabilities, identifying instructional practices addressing the needs of students with intersecting identities that can be replicated through rigorous research design. And lastly, include disability artists in the curriculum. You can go to Flipgrid if you are interested in engaging with me. On Flipgrid, you can post a video comment or questions about this presentation. On the slide here, you can see a screenshot of Flipgrid. On the Flipgrid website, you just enter the join code or follow the link available in the learning module, and I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for listening. My email is on this slide if you want to contact me. Enjoy the rest of your conference.